Welcome back to Beautiful Work, Beautiful Life. We're here today with a guest we are so excited to share with you. We're in a month of sharing some self-discovery tools. And today's tool, I have had the pleasure of enjoying as a tool for myself and have heard so much about it lately. So I feel like this is a great time for us to be sharing it with our community here at Beautiful Work, Beautiful Life. So Laurel, welcome. Hi, hi, hi. And I would love you to introduce our guest today since she came to us through your connections. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. Good morning. So happy to be with you today, Laurel.
Yeah, so glad to be here too.
And Christina, thank you, thank you, thank you. It's always so much fun to have a guest. My introduction is going to be really brief because I want to introduce Christina as I experienced her when we first met.
Love this.
We were at a one-day workshop together. We're both business owners, and we had never met before. But right away in the room, there was some connection, I'll say right away. Her energy just matched mine so well. And she'll probably tell you that mine matched hers also. I was going to say well as well. But Christina is an Enneagram. Do you call yourself a coach, consultant?
Practitioner?
I call myself an Enneagram-informed therapist and coach, but I'm a teacher.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I knew when I met her, I had heard a little bit about Enneagram, but I knew right away she would be a wonderful guest for us because I feel like the two of you have a lot in common, coming from counseling background and working with individuals in that way. So I'm going to let her tell you and tell our listeners about exactly what she does. And a little bit, one little tidbit I will share. I believe, although we've not spent time at the ocean, that Christina loves the ocean as much as you and I do, Laurel.
Oh, that's great. I know. That's so cool. Ocean buddies, right?
That's right.
Well, welcome, Christina. Welcome to the podcast. We're so glad you're here. Yes, let's hear from you. Tell us a little bit about your story and the Enneagram. Yeah.
Sure. I'll just say this one thing about the ocean. My actual logo, actually, you can see it right there, is the horizon on Cape Ann. I think that's Rockport, but that became my logo. A friend of mine painted that, but it's about sort of how there's just so much more depth and breadth to us than I think we actually know. I think like our lives stop at that horizon and we forget that there's more beyond that. And that is actually how I think about the Enneagram. It shows us sort of what's on the other side of that horizon. Yeah. So about me. So, I have been a social worker. That is my calling since 1992. And I have danced with the Enneagram in and out of that time. In 2009, I went back and got a coaching certificate through CTI. And, again, I was reintroduced to the Enneagram there. I had been reintroduced to it initially when I was pregnant with my son, who's now going to be 26. And then around, I want to say 2017, maybe, I did a deep dive with the Enneagram, and I have been using this framework in my own life since then, literally daily, but even guided and with my own mentors and my own teachers up to 6 days a week. But it is something that I have found changed me. And when I find something that changes me, I feel like, oh, wait, everybody should have a little bite of this. Mm-hmm. And so it's really become my focus of my practice. Partly, I will say, because it's helped me so much to change relationships that I didn't know needed changing, but also because I think it fast tracks clinical work. I really do believe that in the future, we're going to see this taught. I teach it to all of my clinical MSW students. I think it fast tracks inner work in a way that academics just haven't caught up with. So that's sort of that's what I want to say about that.
That's amazing to me, the way that you just described it. And I have to say, going to your description of your logo and the horizon, and how that relates to us, that is just so incredible, because we do, and this is the inner work that we do, and the inner work that we want to introduce people, our listeners, to. Like, there is so much more to us than what we see on the surface, right?
Yeah.
And our limited vision of and maybe I'm speaking for myself in this moment, but I'll say my limited vision of who I am,
yes,
is really short. It's not as deep as, I mean, I'm looking at the ocean right now, and I can tell you that my vision of myself is not even that full view. And I'm reminded of that all the time. So I love thinking about the Enneagram as a tool to help our listeners really explore, themselves in more depth.
Mm-hmm.
And I love that you use that in your practice and your own life, of course.
Yeah.
So Laurel, where do you want to jump in this morning?
Well, I would love, Christina, to just share with the listeners, like, what is the Enneagram exactly? I mean, in words that they would understand, right? Yeah.
Yeah, that is, first of all, a great question.
Yeah.
Partly because what I want to say is that when I came to the Enneagram, or when the Enneagram found me, as I like to say, I truly, this is a little humbling, thought I was basically self-actualized. I was a social worker. I had 4 kids. Had done tons of inner work. Like, I sort of knew it. And yet I was frustrated. I was really struggling in my marriage. I had, at that time, I had 4 kids in 6 years. So there was, I had like the toddlers, and then I had the teenagers, and then and I really, truly thought that everything would be fine as long as they listened to me. And, that's not quite the case. And so, and the reason I say that is because I didn't think I needed anything. So the way I really start is that, but I knew, and my type doesn't allow me to see suffering. Still to this day, I have trouble even just saying I have stress, because I really have a hard time. Everything's great. Everything's fine. Like, it's a part of my ego identity to sort of be upbeat and happy. And so this has been hard work for me to sort of acknowledge that I was actually frustrated and suffering. But if we can start there, that's where we start. This isn't for everybody, for sure. But if you're struggling in your life, if you aren't getting the response you want from other people, if you are frustrated a lot, feeling shame, maybe feeling afraid or insecure, like, these are, and it's not all the time, right? But these are places that we can point. And I think of the Enneagram as a framework, right? It helps me to bring more consciousness to myself. It helps me to see what are these core fundamental needs that I'm prioritizing based on temperament. Truly, it's from the moment we're born. Dan Siegel, if you know Dan Siegel as a psychiatrist, he has taught, I've taken some coursework with him, and he, without really talking about it, he had married the Enneagram to some of his work. And, he says for 9 months, all of our needs are taken care of in the womb, everything we possibly could need, all those needs are met. But from the moment we're born to the moment we die, we are fighting for those same needs, right? And so the Enneagram breaks down basically it's based on triads. And so it breaks down, like, there are, some needs that we all have, but we prioritize some over others. And then within those sort of categories, we have these types. It says, this is my preference. This is my yearning, my greatest yearning. And so, and as little ones, that's what we start to notice. And those are like the essential qualities. And so we start to develop an identity around that. So for example, because Laurel said, hey, we'll talk about type 9, like type 9. And I won't speak about you because I don't know you, but type 9, the ego identity for 9 is what they really want is they know They know that we are all connected, that we sort of all come from one, that we are all born out of some big giant explosion in the sky, and we're made of the same material. And so what they're really seeking is harmony, connection, unity. And what happens is we start to develop these fears that are like, what if we can't have that? This is like literally as babies.
Yeah.
There's this fear that we can't have that. And so we push that away. And for most adults, that fear is even subconscious, because if you are that type, it is terrifying to imagine disconnection, separation, terrifying. And so what comes up in that place, this is not actually what I planned to talk about, but hey, it's here. What comes up in that place
great for me too, to explore. Thank you.
is a basic desire. And so the 9, for example, their basic desire is to have peace, to just be peaceful. And so I recently described 7, my type, as a 9 on steroids, because there's some similarities, but they just want peace. And so they develop this ego identity, or this just identity that, like, I'm a peaceful dude. I'm just peaceful. So nothing really matters. Everything's fine. I protect my internal boundaries. I sort of protect my external boundaries. They tend to be really like, whatever you want is good for me, right? And so that's a beautiful quality. But like all 9 types, we have these beautiful, beautiful qualities that we experience. But in the average sort of levels of just our everyday lives, without consciousness, without awareness, without the Enneagram, without someone bringing this to our attention, we're just stuck in that habit. Yeah. And so we don't like stretch out of that. And so 9s sort of disengage. They're really lovely people to be around. I'm married to one. They're patient. It's this beautiful quality. However, if we're not engaging with the world, we're really missing out on something. And so in an office or in a business meeting, the 9s tend to be the ones that are like quiet. They might be the last to contribute. And so, when I work with leaders and they know the Enneagram, it's like, you got to engage that 9. Just because they're sitting there, it doesn't mean everything's fine. Ask them what they want. My house, I have to engage my husband to ask him, because he would prefer to just hang out. And so that might be a place where the 9 says, and you all talked about shadows, right? On a podcast recently, I guess, it's like, if we identify as a peaceful person, we are also not identifying with someone who is bold and courageous and engaging and, showy and like out there standing, authentically being singular, right? Here I am. That's the sort of opposite of 9. And so we get to work with that and play with that in if someone comes to me and starts to talk about this might be some of the things that we actually talk about.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, as I listened to you, I just was thinking too, Christina, about how, ultimately, like those deep needs, right? If they're not being met early in life, it becomes a kind of a cluster of woundings, around those needs. Right. And so that kind of also sets the stage for, later in life, like, developing survival skills around that and personas and all that kind of stuff. And just like, thinking about, myself, since we used like a 9, right? And all that you say, I relate to. The thing, that for me, right, was so challenging was wanting that peace and wanting that harmony, and then realizing other people don't really care that much about it. Not everybody cares, right?
They don't prioritize it.
Yeah, they don't always prioritize that. So, it's how do you live in the world where that's the reality, and start to find some comfort in that, but still, seek to promote your agenda, so to speak.
Yeah. And even I'll say, without getting too far into the weeds, there are 3 types that come at the world from the body, from this kinesthetic sense of gut knowing. There's 3, and they tend to have issues with anger. There's 3 types that come at the world with about, it's like wanting to be seen in a particular way, right? And so if you think of a little child, every child wants autonomy and respect. They want to know that they can. I have a child whose first word was self, for example. Wow. Like, they want to know that they can survive on their own. That's a body type. There's 3 types that want to be seen. So you think about a little child who just wants to know that someone sees them the way they are. And they tend they grow up, and it tends to be image focused people, attention, validation. That's what we tend to say that they're striving for. And they tend to have issues with shame. And then the third, the head types tend to have issues with safety, and they're seeking safety and security, and tend to have issues with fear. If you think of a little child, they want to know someone's watching the ship. They want to know they're going to be okay. And so these little people who have these fears that we tend to think, oh, of course, they grow up, and that is all still living in their nervous system. Maybe not necessary as an adult, right? But we're still reacting from these really childlike places.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's great. Christina, when somebody comes to work with you, tell us what it's like to go through the process, like how,
Sure.
Yeah, just so people get a sense of that.
Yeah. There's a couple ways that someone might come to me. They might want one-on-one work. And I would say most people are a little afraid of group work, so they like one-on-one work. I will say that when people actually engage in group work with the Enneagram, it's really fun. I have a group of women I've been meeting with since, I think, 2020. And it was supposed to be a 20-week course, and still meeting weekly, because first of all, we're talking about stuff that they're like, we don't talk about this in our, with civilians, and so they just like giving people a place to be seen and witnessed in their life is just a powerful experience. But when I was first introduced to the Enneagram, I took a weekend course. I know I'm going to get back to your question, but I took a weekend course. I was hooked. And then my teacher, who I adore and has taught me so much, I still work with her. She did whatever it was, 5-month course or something, taking people through The Wisdom of the Enneagram by Russ Hudson and Don Riso. And in that group, and I have sort of taken this on, and I do some similar work, you get to see all the types at work. So you get to really see like, oh, that's what they mean when they talk about a 2, or that's what they mean when they talk about a 5. And as we engage with each other, we're becoming more intimate with each other. And I always say those essence friends, as we call them, these people who you can be really real with, for me, they really taught me what a sibling relationship could be like. My family, when you have an argument, you stop speaking. But we could be with each other's shadows. We could be with each other's really dark parts and still love each other through that. Didn't happen right away, but that's this beautiful work of Enneagram work in a group. So I will say that, that's my favorite, is to take people through groups, but a lot of people work with me one-on-one. So they come in. What I typically do now, and I change this up every once in a while, is I have them take an assessment from the Enneagram Institute. It happens to be the assessment that I think is the most accurate, depending on your age, and it'll give you your top 3 types. So I want to say this other thing about the Enneagram. I also describe it as the 9 parts of your personality. So we just lean into one part of that, but it really is, we have all 9 parts, right? And so we start to narrow down type. I hold it very loosely. I do think it's really important to type yourself, because then the work, you can just, you're like sort of in it. But it's okay. My husband thought he was a 5 for a long time. And some people take years, and he's actually a 9. And so that journey is really important. People want me to tell them what their type is. I think the journey of typing yourself is actually a really cool journey, because to your point, Laurel, I think I'm a 3. I'm going to work on my type 3 issues. I'm still healing some really important parts of myself.
Yeah.
And that once we sort of clear away that, then maybe I'll actually see my type 7 garbage much better. Our type is often a blind spot, So that's how we just work through. People come to me week after week with like, here's what's going on this week, like traditional therapy. And we just use the Enneagram to put it into some perspective. I have a friend and a colleague who says, she's from Nashville, and she has this really Southern drawl. I won't give it justice, but she's like, good fishermen. I won't even do it, because what if she listens? So she's like, good fishermen know where to fish. They know where all the good fish are. And she says the Enneagrams like that. It tells you where to fish. So if you're in a place, if you're feeling frustrated, discontent, not belonging, people aren't seeing you for who you are, or maybe you're just anxious all the time. It gives you a place like, well, if this is your ego structure, this is an area you might want to point to. And that's what we do. We sort of objectify it, bring it out of ourselves. We get to look at it, and then the work right away is like, just notice that thing. Just notice every time it happens. Pretty soon people come back and they're like, oh my God, I do it all the time. Oh my God. And when we realize we do it all the time, we start to also realize that it's not about that person, right? So in a relationship situation, no one is objectively a jerk. I was going to use a harder word, but I will not. Like, no one is objectively a jerk. Like, we have a dynamic between us that doesn't work, but that's this, our triggers are always about us. And so we get to examine it that way.
It's so incredible when you described it as the 9 parts of our personality, right? That really clicked with me because, we often talk, Laurel and I talk about, our wholeness, right? Like and I talk about this a lot with my clients, the whole beingness of an individual. And I think that's one of the reasons that we focus sometimes on, and some of our topics have been about shadow, right? Because we are both and so now if I think about myself, that I have 9 parts of my personality, I know which I prefer and I know which I avoid, right? And so I think for me, I've never done the Enneagram work. I don't know what type I am, but I think it would be really helpful for me to have that kind of holistic tool for not only who I am, but who do I want to be? Like, what parts of my personality do I need to lean into and strengthen and become more familiar with, right? I love that thought that it is a tool like that.
And call upon, right, Laurel? So like, we just do this. We don't really see it this way necessarily, but we're doing the same thing over and over. We're using the same coping mechanisms where I also describe it as the 9 ways people have anxiety. Every single one of them, every single person type has the capacity for anxiety. There is a particular type that shows anxiety in the way we typically describe it, but we're all just doing our things because we're dysregulated. And so what we actually get to notice is like a question that I actually have fake temporary tattoos that sometimes I'll give people. And I have one that says, is it true? And it's like, is it true? I had an example. If you'd like, I'll share this. I'll share an example early on in my work where I was like, the heck is going on? Like, I didn't understand what I was doing. I was just doing what this woman told me to do. And I also, by the way, I do a presence practice at the beginning of every single session because we want to start to access our body intelligence, our heart intelligence, and our head intelligence. Most of us are walking around using 2 of those and forgetting about the third. And so I was about to yell at my kids. I remember I was walking through the door from the kitchen into the front hall and they were all upstairs and I was about to scream like, will someone take the trash out? Like, for 20 years, it goes out on Monday nights. And I felt this body like twinge in my back. It sounds silly if you're not used to this language, but now I really understand it. And it just stopped me. And because I knew I was activated, right? I didn't have that language before, but I was activated, triggered, however you want to call it. And I took a breath. And I like literally what you did at the beginning of our call today is like, I felt my body, felt my feet on the floor, took a breath. And I just said, what's actually true? And what rose up, not from the head, not from the body. It was just this awareness. I'm afraid I'm going to be taking out the trash for the rest of my life. And which, as a 7, my core fear is being stuck. That's like a really big fear for a 7, is being stuck in the same place. That was a huge awareness. So I could just take a breath. Doesn't mean I'm not so evolved that I might not get angry, but I didn't have to yell. I realized it was about me. My activation was about me. And I did want them to take the trash out, by the way. Like, that can still happen, but I don't have to scream. Right.
Right.
I actually love taking the trash out now. It's like my thing. It's like, oh, I get outside every day. I walk into the driveway. It's also takes up way less energy than screaming, right? Holding a grudge. Like, I could hold a grudge for generations, right? Or I could just take the trash out myself.
I love that.
Oh, so good. That is such a great example. I love that example. And I love too the activation, like describing, because I think that's one of the things that Laurel and I, many of our podcast episodes, we try to weave in, these themes of being body present, because body present, your body has so much intelligence and we aren't used to making it regular part of our experience to tap into it. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And use it to our benefit. Oftentimes,
Right.
Unfortunately, it gets used to our detriment for like that example. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like for me, I tend to forget my heart. I thought I was like an emotional person. Here's what I've learned about myself. I think my emotions. I don't actually experience them as a heart intelligence. And so I didn't. And so as I clear this up and as I ask myself, our heart intelligence is like, what do we want? What matters to us? What's my why? Like, which was something I don't know what my why is. Like, I don't know what that even means. It's because I wasn't really paying attention to my heart. And that we happen to. So because I'm a 7, I have these issues. My teacher can say, well, what do you actually want? And I'm like, well, what does that even mean? Right. So we start to like that. She knew the Enneagram. She knew where to point. That we had to see, this is something I've never explored. Like I don't actually explore this piece. I just think and do and think and do and think and do and think and do. Left that heart out. And so each of the types we could actually do that for is look at what's the intelligence you habitually ignore.
Yeah. It's so interesting when you said that most people forget about 1. The intelligences, I remember, head, heart, and the third is intuition.
Belly, body.
Yep, body. Okay.
Yep.
And I mean, I've got to say that in my existence, 95% of my life was lived only in the head. I would just, all of my intelligence came from above my chin, right? And it's interesting to think about the Enneagram as a tool of teaching people how to get into their full intelligence.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because that embodied self-awareness is incredible. And what I love about this is that, I have a lot of clients who are head thinkers. And when you said thinking your emotions, right? Many people do think their emotion rather than feel their emotion. And the Enneagram strikes me as a tool for those people who like head thinking, tangible, process-driven intelligence.
Yeah.
Sign me up.
Yeah. Russ Hudson, who happens to have just is a teacher of mine. He's one of the there's these different lineages, but he wrote the Wisdom of the Enneagram. He says, most people think they're thinking all the time. It's not true thinking. They're running stories in their head. They're ruminating. They're that's sort of what we call the lower head center. When we're present, when we're showing up in all 3 centers, we're accessing this amazing inner guidance that comes from the higher head center, discovery, wonder. I always think of it as sparklers going off, that amazement. There's something really beautiful about that. But generally, when we're walking around using 2 of our centers, it's more like we're just thinking and planning and anticipating and you don't want to watch a movie with me because I have it figured out in the first 5 minutes rather than actually enjoying the first 5 minutes. I jump to the end. Head-centered people are known for reading the end of a book first. That just calms them so that they can go back to the beginning, right? So there's these things we do that we sort of say, well, I'm just the kind of person who, and I think the Enneagram sort of says, there's no such thing. You've just been conditioned that way, that you can be, and you're going to have a preference and a temperament for sure. But you actually, if this situation calls for more diplomatic conversation, then I get to pay attention to that rather than saying, well, I'm just a frank communicator. What's their problem, right? I get to say, oh, that's part of my type. So maybe this situation calls for me to be a little more diplomatic. So I can bring that in. I'm just bringing consciousness to my habits so that I can shift them if necessary. Not always necessary, but often necessary.
Yeah. I just have to say one more thing that the tool that I am seeing, when I think about relationships, right? I just went on a retreat this weekend. It was actually Thursday right through Sunday. And
beautiful.
Part of the questioning was about your relationship with yourself, with others, and with your inspiration or motivation, right? Mm-hmm. And so last night, I found myself thinking a lot about the in relationship. Who am I in relationship to others, and how do I show up in those relationships? And the Enneagram to think about, I'll give you an example. My husband and I and my daughter, my youngest daughter, were talking about going on vacation together. And my daughter and I have things picked out. We have a budget, we have dates, we know what we want. And so we have found options. Presenting them to my husband, he has to research them a little. He has to think about them a little. He has to compare them. And it's really interesting for me to say goodbye to him this morning as he goes to work, knowing I may not have his reaction for days on what I've proposed, because he processes things very different than I do. Right. And I am sure that if we both had our Enneagram done, we'd be different types.
Yeah.
Right. So it's really interesting to think about it in that way. And I want to encourage our listeners that, to think about it as another tool to be in relationship with themselves and learn how they manage relationships with others because of their relationship with themselves.
Yes. Yeah. One maybe homework assignment for your listeners or for you.
We love this.
Love that.
If this is something that draws you, read about the types, right? Of course, someone can make an appointment with me. I also, incidentally, I have a small community on Mighty Networks that is open. People are welcome to join it. And this is a place where I'm not a fan. I'm on Instagram, not really a fan of Facebook and Instagram, partly because I don't trust those private I want to be able to have more depth of conversation. Mighty Networks allows for that. There's no targeted ads and whatever. Anyway, but that's a place we talk about things. But if you read about the types, you might just start, I love the word you used, Laurel, like, what's my relationship to this? When I came in to do this, when I started doing this work, there were two types, incidentally, the other two types in the head center that I was like, I don't have any of that in me. Like, I didn't understand it. Like, that's a clue. Like, if it's a blind spot, I don't understand it, or I don't like them, I don't like them. I don't like that kind of person. You talked about this in your shadows, image people, whatever. Yeah. So we start to just look at what's my relationship with that type. When I read about that, am I envious of it? Do I want that more of that? I'm like, ew, I definitely don't want that. Those are really great clues. I do want to actually, one of my next, and by the time this airs, it probably would have already happened, but I want to do a shadow retreat or workshop, because I think looking at just using the objective data, we can read about it and just start to look at what do I not like? And then start to ask those questions. How am I also like that? How is that in me? And just to start to explore very gently and very, with there's nothing hard. I don't push anybody, it's like, okay, you don't see it. That's okay. Maybe it's not there. Usually it comes up, but and just to start to explore what's my relationship with each of these types. And then we start to have a clue as to who in the world might activate us. Right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So Laurel, we probably need to wrap up soon, but it looks like you have a question though.
Could you tell?
Yes.
I know, right? Well, I had a lot of questions, so I'm going to have to just kind of table that for now. But what was coming up for me was, as I was listening, I was thinking, Christina, kind of like we're coming full circle, which is, you started your profession in social work. It sounds like, for me, when I started in this world of inner work, I started out as a mental health counselor. And, for me right away, I knew that I wanted more than just that as what I could offer people. And also for myself, as my own personal healing journey evolved, right? Was like that had a place, but there were so many other tools as I was learning, right, about energy work and shamanism and Tai Chi and like just all the things, right? There's talk therapy is great. Don't anybody think that I'm knocking it, because I'm not, because I do it, still do it all the time with people. It's super helpful, but it can only get to one layer is often how I feel about that work. And so to start to weave in other ways of accessing different parts of yourself and connecting with different aspects internally is so huge and such a game changer in terms of your ability to really move forward in the ways that you want to. So I would say to people that are listening to the podcast today, if you feel stuck, If you feel like you're in a repeated pattern that you don't want to be in, if you feel like, I mean, just listening to Christina talk about today, like, I don't know what I want, right? I work with people all the time that don't know what they want. There are tools that can help you. And the Enneagram is a beautiful tool for that, right?
Yeah. I think so. I mean, it's what spoke to me. And by all means, there's other tools, right? We can fill in the gaps.
So many tools. Yeah.
I do a lot of Byron Katie inquiry work alongside this. We just, we find what works. And this is something that works.
Yeah. And to trust yourself. Like if you're called to something, if you're listening into something, or you're watching a YouTube video or a podcast or whatever, or you just happen to be talking to somebody and you get like a little niggle because they're sharing something and you're like, wait a minute, like you feel the pulling inside. It's like trusting yourself that there's probably something there for you to help you on your path of discovery and evolution, moving yourself forward, right?
Yeah. Just get curious about it. That's it. Just start to notice these things. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. So Christina, how can people reach you? Can you just give us, we're going to put it in the show notes, but just for a quick, so they know.
Sure. I have a website. It's ChristinaGranahan.com. On Instagram, I think I'm Coach Granahan Coach. I think Granahan Coaching. I think I should know that.
I think you are. I think that's you.
Granahan Coaching. And then in Mighty Networks, it's the community is called the Enneagram in Conscious Living. And I think you can do a search for it. If you can't do a search for it, it is in my bio, on my Instagram page, and it's also in and get on my newsletter. That's actually not like awesome about sending newsletters, so I will not harass you for sure. They're few and far between, but I do talk a lot. I just I have this awareness. I'm going to write about it, and I send it out, and I talk about my offerings there too.
Yeah, that's great.
That's great.
So kind of in closing, right? What would you recommend that people go and try to do their own assessment? I mean, I know you mentioned the site, the Enneagram Institute assessment, right? That you could go there and do it.
Absolutely. If people are curious, do it. And then here's what I suggest.
Yeah.
Three highlighters. So they will send you a packet of information. 3 highlighters. One highlighter, one color is like, definitely. One highlighter is like, definitely not. And one is like, eh. And look at those types, and you can very visually see like, like this type has way more definitely than these types. I would say the thing I would sort of qualify that with is that just know that we do have blind spots. Oftentimes people will say, well, I relate to all of that part of this type, but definitely not that part. And it's the unhealthy parts. It's the parts we don't want to see. And so we just start to notice where those show up to. And then that helps us to sort of soften into, ultimately, if I'm doing things that I'm not conscious of, maybe that jerk over there is too. And so like, we just don't know any better because we're stuck, right? And so we learn about what it means to be present, how to bring consciousness to this, and then we can do something about it. But yes, I suggest that,
I was thinking when you were saying the three colors, the 3 highlighters, go through and make those, the list. I'm the list maker, right? But identify what is it that you are definitely not. And then I don't know what the third one was, but because my brain, meh, right? I use the word interesting. Whenever I say that's interesting, it's meh. But and then take the list of I'm definitely not these things, and bring it to a trusted, close friend.
Yeah.
And say, this is the list of things I think I am not. Do you ever see those things come out in me?
Yeah. Right? It's beautiful. My kids said, you're typed wrong. You're not joyful. Like they literally said that to me. You're not always happy. And I thought, oh, they see the ugly side. They see the darker side of me. They don't actually see this part of me that the world sees. So it's really beautiful. Then I can start to notice that in my relationship with my kids, which by the way, has improved tenfold.
I can only imagine. Yeah. I mean, okay.
We could go on
there. I know forever. I know. And we'd love to have you come back sometime, Christina, as we keep exploring here. Yeah. That's great. Thank you so much for today. Thank you for your time and your expertise and your wisdom. And and I feel like the show is like a great introduction for people. So super helpful. Yeah.
I love the work you two are doing here. I love what you're putting out into the world. So thank you too.
Yeah.
And we are having fun doing it.
We are. Yeah. Okay.
I can tell.
Off we go for now. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Bye for now,
Bye.
everybody.